I wasn't planning on playing this game. When this game was first announced, I didn't really have an interest in it because I didn't really see a point in having a choice-driven prequel game when you know that your choices won't matter. But it just so happened I was able to get the game on a really good sale, so I figured it might be worth it to give it a try. And by the end I found it okay. Here's why. Oh, and I should mention that I'll try to keep spoilers for the game at a minimum, but I will be talking about major plot points of the first game, so consider yourself warned. One thing about the game's quality that has stayed consistent with its predecessor is the soundtrack. The music has more of an edge to it than the previous games, which fits very well with Chloe's personality as opposed to the gentler style of Max's music. The music plays a really important part in setting the mood, and the soundtrack definitely does its job and then some. The dialogue is definitely a step in the right direction because it doesn't seem like it was written by grown adults who are trying to emulate how teenagers speak, but have no idea of how teenagers actually speak. I admit that Max saying weird phrases makes sense for a character and is even endearing, but when everyone else talks like that, it's pretty obvious that the writers were trying just a bit too hard to sound cool, even if they did tone it down later. But now we don't have to worry about that at all! So yay! Now let's get to the meat of the game, the story. If you bought the deluxe edition like I did, you get a 1-hour bonus episode called Farewell that takes place in the Price household right before Max moved away, where you also get to play as Max. It's not necessary for the overall plot, but it does serve as a nice prelude to the main game, and it was neat to see the relationship Max had with the Price family before things fell apart. The story in the main game is all about Chloe Price in a relationship with Rachel Amber, a character that was important in the first game, but was still shrouded in mystery. Overall, I do find the game to be an enjoyable experience. The emotional moments of the story are done very well. Okay, they kinda killed the moment on that one, but everything else is good. I particularly like the parts where we see that Chloe is still coming to terms with the loss of her father. I'd even say that helps her become a more relatable character. And of course, it was interesting that we got to see how Chloe and Rachel's relationship developed. As for the rest of the story, like I said, I enjoyed playing the game, but there were also a lot of things I couldn't get over. First off, I think a big goal for the developers was to make Chloe a more sympathetic character because of how divisive she was in the first game. She often acted immaturely, selfishly, and irresponsibly, and was unnecessarily hostile to people that really didn't deserve it. Now Chloe has more nice moments even without player intervention despite her abrasive attitude, especially as the game progresses. But another thing that was done to make her more sympathetic was making a bunch of other people absolute assholes. For example, it turns out that Max stopped talking to Chloe out of the blue, even though Max knew damn well how broken up Chloe was after her dad's death and needed Max's support more than ever. I know that even really close people can drift apart, and it had to inevitably happen to these two, but why? It does explain why Chloe can come off as possessive towards Max, but after knowing how close they were and seeing as how Max's personality didn't change too much from a preteen to young adult, it can come off as kind of jarring that she would be so inconsiderate to someone that was practically her sister at the time. On top of that, she knew that Chloe was emotionally vulnerable since she had to move away the same day as William's funeral. Seriously, f*** you, Max's parents. Maybe it would have been better if Chloe was the one who initiated the distance between them, because being able to talk directly to a person, with that person being Rachel, was better for her than just communicating behind a screen and not knowing when Max would be available. I don't know, I'm not a professional writer, but it still bugs me nonetheless. There's a couple of more instances, but those are spoilers, so let's move on to David. David was a hard ass in the first game, and there were at least a few times where he definitely crossed the line. But sometimes it was hard to disagree with his strictness towards Chloe since he was smoking weed in her mother's house and stole one of his guns and lied about it, which he then treats in a way you really shouldn't treat a deadly weapon. Now it turns out he was an asshole who acted like a dick to Chloe even if you took the dialogue choices where she would be half decent to him. Now at one point there's a possibility that they may just bury the hatchet. Isn't that nice? Too bad it doesn't fucking matter since we know that their relationship is just going to go back to fucking square one in like a year. Yeah, that's a big issue for me that I knew was going to be in the game. The game has a lot of high stakes moments, which is engaging at first, but the tension is killed pretty quickly when you realize that nothing bad is going to happen to the main characters because you know that the developers aren't going to just create a time paradox and kill them before the events of the main game. A lot of the game's choices also don't hold a lot of weight since you know that won't really matter in the grand scheme of things. For example, there's a choice where you can let Rachel take the fall for Chloe and Chloe will just get suspended and Rachel will lose her part in the school play. Or Chloe can take the blame and will be expelled, but Rachel gets to keep her part. I knew that Chloe was going to get expelled eventually, so the choice kind of felt like a no-brainer. The same thing can be said for a lot of choices in the game. You can make a lot of choices that can affect Chloe's relationship with other characters, but it doesn't matter one bit because the choices you make obviously aren't going to change the way the first game's story plays out. It's just so frustrating to have these choices that feel like they should have a big impact on these characters' relationships, but you know they don't. The ones involving Chloe's mother and David are especially frustrating since, like I said, you can make choices that make it seem like Chloe's on her way to having an amicable relationship with them, but then you know that, for one reason or another, it won't stick, and you can only make guesses as to why. It all just seems so pointless. Maybe it's my own fault for falling into that trap, but it still annoys me. Oh, and before I forget, instead of having a supernatural angle, Chloe has a backtalk mechanic where you have to choose the right dialogue choice in order to out-argue someone. It's not nearly as interesting as a feature as Max's rewind power, but, you know, it's something. There's another thing I couldn't help but notice now that we know more of Rachel's backstory. We know that she's the daughter of the DA, who is a highly respected person in Arcadia Bay. And yet, now that we know this, you'd think that Rachel's disappearance would be a lot bigger of a deal than what we see in the first game, especially since he disappeared only 6 months ago. I highly doubt that her DA father wouldn't be pushing every investigator in town as hard as he can to find his missing daughter. Hell, we don't even get so much as a mention of Rachel's parents in the first game, despite their aforementioned status. I know that her relationship with her parents can become complicated, but no matter what happens in the game, it's always clear that her father loves her to pieces, and I have a hard time believing that he would just give up after 6 months of not finding even the smallest clue of what happened to her. And then the end of the game just feels inconclusive. It just ends. I guess that's to be expected, but there's still a lot of things that happened after this that we don't really get to see except for small montage glimpses. We also don't get to see what kind of relationship Rachel had with Chloe's mother and David, despite the fact that we know she often stayed at Chloe's house. I also wish we could have seen more of Chloe's past before she met Rachel. I know that the game was all about their relationship, and that's fine, but I personally think it would have been nice to see since a lot of things happened between William's death and this game. What was Chloe and David's early relationship like? Was he immediately acting like a deuce to her, or did he at least try to be nice, but Chloe was still understandably jaded towards him and that's where the tension began? How did she meet Frank and fall into debt with him? How did she fall into bad coping mechanisms in general? I know that they probably couldn't have fit all of that into the game, but I hope that there's still a chance that we get to see it at some point in the future. There's a number of other things I could talk about, but because I don't want to spoil things, I'll stop here. The game definitely has its good qualities, and they were just enough to make the game enjoyable, but it couldn't stop the things that were bugging me from, well, bugging me. I feel like that this would have been better as a companion novel or comic or something like that, especially since there's quite a few of those for other games out there. Maybe I'll talk about the spoilery things that bothered me some other time. For now, though, I'll call this a fun but ultimately just okay experience with futile choices and missed opportunities.